Good afternoon, Arizona. Welcome to the Good Life with Lance. You're Dr. Fitness. That's me. If you're a first-time listener, let me, briefly introduce myself. That could take a couple of minutes, I think. No, short one, right? Right, Connor? Not a long one? Short one, okay. Anyhow, Connor's giving me permission to introduce myself. Anyhow, I'm a former Mr. America from the 1980s, twice. Mr. America, also, I'm a nutritionist. I'm also a life coach. And I am I was a student of the gentleman who coined the term core training or exercise. I was a understudy of his for many, many years. And, so when you look at exercise in general and core, I'm the guy to talk to because a lot of these guys who practice it really don't know what they're doing. Anyhow, the show phone number to studio here is 602-260-5394. If you have a number, and if you're a first-time listener to the show, I've been doing this a long time. It's dedicated to people in my age group. I'm 69 years old. Usually the people listening to my show are probably 50 and above, even though we do have a couple of younger people that do that once in a while. They get a little bit of information and knowledge so they can apply this to their own lives. And I like to talk about topics that I'm interested in based on my age. And, you have the aging aspects of disease and the aging aspects of, of dealing with life in general. And, it catches us all by the butt if we're not aware of it or if we're not, ready for it. And so my show helps to prepare people for it by giving them information they don't normally get. And, when we look at heart disease in general, Americans are still suffering from the leading cause of death worldwide, and it's due to our lifestyles. And so I dug up this study. I heard a friend of mine, Dr. Ken Beery, talking about it, of the risk factors, hazard factors, or hazard ratios for development of coronary heart disease. And it's quite enlightening when you get this information, understand that we here at the studio at 550 KFY have been on target for a long, long time on what the biggest hazard ratios for development of heart disease is. And when you look at this in general, most people are not told this. You're given the false impression that the biggest hazard for heart disease or coronary heart disease is cholesterol. And it's not. Because most people in my age group, you'll go into the doctor's office, and the first thing you want to put you on is a statin drug. And when I give you the information that I'm about to present to you in regards to what the leading hazard is, risk factor for coronary heart disease is, you may flip out. This is based on a 21-year study, follow-up, the Women's Health Study, which is huge. 120 million and other markers of insulin resistance as predictors of future coronary heart disease. A Women's Health Study, also established between 1992 and 1995 at Harvard Medical School, was designed in a clinical trial to evaluate the effects of vitamin E or low-dose aspirin on the risk of developing coronary heart disease or cancer in initially healthy women free from cardiovascular disease and cancer at baseline. These studies found no overall benefit for either intervention. In other words, they didn't do any good. A subsequent 21.4-year-long study, prospective follow-up cohort study of 28,024 women, has evaluated more than 50 clinical lipid, that's cholesterol, inflammatory, and metabolic risk factors and biomarkers for the subsequent development of coronary heart disease. Here's where the numbers come in. Type 2 diabetes has long been considered by some to be an important risk factor in the development of coronary heart disease than elevated blood cholesterol concentrations. More important. Do you hear that? The latter being the hypothesis tested by the Women's Health Study. The results of a 21.4-year-long prospective follow-up, the Women's Health Study confirmed that type 2 diabetes, not an elevated blood cholesterol concentration, is the key driver of future coronary heart disease development. It shows the most important results of this part of the study. They show figures here. Shows that the strongest predictors of future coronary heart disease development in these postmenopausal women are all the classical clinical markers of insulin resistance. Now, insulin resistance, to define this for you, is what we call prediabetes, okay, or metabolic resistance. And that's an indication of a fat belly, okay, in triglycerides, which I'm going to show you here in a moment, over 100. And the average female in this country today has a 39-inch waist. And the average male, nearly 41. 39-inch waist. It says here, these are the classical clinical markers of insulin resistance, most especially type 2 diabetes, which increases the hazard ratio 10.7-fold increased risk. If you have type 2 diabetes, you're 10.7 times more likely to develop coronary heart disease. Metabolic syndrome, which we refer to as prediabetes, is 6.09% increase. High blood pressure, 4.48. Obesity, 4.33. And all the other markers of insulin resistance had greater predictive value for coronary heart disease than did smoking. Then they did blood markers. They looked at the blood in general. In addition to most metabolic risk factors, what they call lipoprotein insulin resistance score was a 6.4-fold increased risk of coronary heart disease. Cholesterol was the last one, or second to last one. But what do they treat you for? Cholesterol. They don't treat you for blood sugar, okay, or those parameters that are tied to that. Parameters like triglycerides, which are right there with the blood. When you look at the blood profile, triglycerides were 2.14. If you had high triglycerides, you were 2.14 higher risk times, 2.14 times, that's 200%, risk of developing coronary heart disease. Now, here's some information you probably do not hear. Because you can go in the doctor's office and get your blood profile done, and it comes back and your triglycerides are 100, 120, and say, yeah, you're okay. You're not. Triglycerides have been well established as a risk factor for coronary heart disease. For several decades, as early as 1959, higher serum triglycerides have been reported in patients with coronary artery disease. Nearly 2/3 of all coronary heart disease cases in the United States can be at least partly blamed on abnormal triglycerides. Triglycerides as a major cause of heart disease has been frequently ignored or neglected. Then it goes on to say, high triglycerides, which are tied into metabolic resistance, insulin resistance, type 2 diabetes. High triglycerides alone increase the risk of heart attack nearly threefold. And people with the highest levels of triglycerides to HDL, the good cholesterol, had 16 times the risk of heart attack as those with lower ratio of triglycerides to HDL. That's the good cholesterol. In a study of 340 heart attack patients and 340 of their healthy same-age counterparts. The ratio of triglycerides to HDL was the strongest predictor of heart attack, even more accurate than LDL to HDL. The ratio should be no more than 2-to-1. So if your triglycerides are 100 and your HDL is 40, that's too high. Then it goes on to say, people with triglyceride levels at above 100, or at 100 now, were 50% more likely than those with lower triglycerides to suffer from future heart attacks, need bypass surgery or angioplasty, or die from heart disease. Get this now. And this is about 25 years ago now. It's worse now. The average triglyceride level in the United States is 134 milligrams per deciliter and is considerably higher than triglycerides below 100, commonly observed in countries where heart disease rates are low. The higher triglycerides are associated with both increases in body weight and the disturbing increases in diabetes. It's a two-sided problem because people with high triglycerides often develop insulin resistance, a major factor in the most common type of diabetes. In some cases, high triglycerides are identified years before the onset of diabetes. So you're looking at this and you're saying, here we have this blood parameter of triglycerides, and here we have this metabolic parameter or development, okay, of type 2 diabetes. And you're looking at two of the most largest increased risk factors of coronary heart disease that there is, way higher than LDL cholesterol, which is 1.38. Really low, at the bottom of the list. Yet, many of the medications that we're taking today are being prescribed blood pressure drugs like beta blockers, anti-inflammatories, things like prednisone, birth control pills, and worst of all, statin drugs increase blood sugar, increase your risk of developing type 2 diabetes. So if type 2 diabetes is the number one hazard ratio for the development of coronary heart disease, we got a real problem. Because the drugs that we're taking to treat the conditions that are lifestyle control contribute to a progression or an increased risk of coronary heart disease, the number one killer of Americans. And the way to reverse this is actually change your lifestyle, change your diet, exercise. Unfortunately, when you read this article, which I'll share with you more after the break, the diet that's recommended to most of us, or all of us, by the American Heart Association is the wrong diet. The number here is 602-260-5394. Now, here, if this sounds like you that I'm talking about, and you want to cut your risk down, make these changes. Exercise, eat like Lance, and be accountable. Replay itself tomorrow afternoon at 4 o'clock. So tell your friends in other parts of the country if they, if you have a person you really care about and you want them to be healthier, tell them to listen to my show. You're going to get information you don't normally get. It's out there, but you don't normally get. I've been touting low carbohydrate consumption way before many of the keto experts that are out there today were even born. And anybody who's been in the Valley who's listened to my show that long, it's been, I've been on the radio here, KFY, most of the time. It's about 1991. You're looking at, 23 years, a long time. Okay, touting the same message. And now people are listening and learning. And, I've done a lot of research, and proof is in the pudding. They're grabbing on this thing, realizing that the diets we've been recommended for so long is the wrong diet, which is a low-fat, high-carbohydrate diet. So I'm going to get back into this study that was done by Dr. Tim Noakes and get more into what he says here. He says, beginning in 1993, this women's health study was designed to provide supporting evidence for a dietary pattern change consistent with the U.S. Department of Agriculture 1977 dietary guidelines for Americans, which encouraged North Americans to reduce their dietary, especially saturated fat intake. In his open-heart study, Noakes concludes that the prescription of a low-fat, heart-healthy diet to post-menopausal women with established coronary heart disease, because they are likely to be insulin resistant, is scientifically unjustifiable and potentially unethical. This is what he's saying, hiding unhealthy heart outcomes in a low-fat diet trial. The Women's Health Initiative randomized controlled dietary modification trial finds that postmenopausal women with established coronary heart disease were at an increased risk of adverse outcome if they consumed a low-fat, heart-healthy diet. If they consumed a low-fat, heart-healthy diet. And he goes on to say how the best diet for for people who have coronary heart disease or want to prevent that is a low carbohydrate keto diet. Low carb keto diet. Eat like Lance. That's because triglycerides, which I've referred to earlier, talked about earlier, come from carbohydrates. They don't come from eating a steak or a stick of butter. They come from carbohydrates, triglycerides. And those triglycerides are the main storage of fat on our body. But they're also what we make LDL cholesterol from. And the higher the triglycerides, the more damaged LDL becomes because you have different particle sizes. And it's all tied into metabolic resistance, type 2 diabetes, large abdominal. And that's lifestyle. That's diet. Lack of exercise, which most Americans fall in this category today, particularly people in my age group. We have 74 million plus Americans who are overweight. I mean, I hear commercials on this station constantly for all these various weight loss products. And I'm not going to name who they are. I just hear them. It's lifestyle, eating the right diet. And if you want to burn fat, you have to cut down carbohydrate consumption because the body conserves fat for energy at times of need, of starvation. So if you have carbs available in plenty, which we do today, you won't burn fat. You store it for a time of famine. That's our genes. We're designed to store body fat. Anybody around today, their ancestors lived through a 100,000-year ice age. 100,000 years. Yes. What did they eat? They didn't eat a loaf of bread. They didn't eat Honey Nut Cheerios. They didn't drink OJ. They didn't drink soda pop. That's the worst stuff available. They didn't have a pizza. They lived off of wild game that they can find and catch. Because you don't grow a whole lot in ice, can you? Or snow. So they had to live off of that. The animals that they caught. So we're designed to store fat. So the only way to burn fat is to use the fat by not eating carbohydrates. So the body makes it readily available. Our natural diet is more based closer to a keto diet most of the year. I hate to call it keto. It's low carb. Keto, it's based, they call it, it's a marketing name. Keto. Okay, that's ketosis. That's ketones that you release from fat when you're eating low carbohydrates to use for energy. The heart can use it. Your heart loves this stuff. The brain can use it. Did you know that? We're designed to burn fat for fuel. But when obesity is as high as it is, and 3/4 of your population is overweight, we got a problem over consuming this stuff. And the only way to fix this is knowledge and application. And that comes from like shows like mine. I mean, they've been ongoing studies looking at low-carb consumption for over 100 years. What do you think our ancestors ate on when they were on the plains? Traveling across the country in wagon trains. They didn't have time to sit down and farm the fields. They had to live off of wild game that they caught, right? I'm right. I'm not making this up. They had some hard times. They had to burn fat for energy. Anybody who didn't gain body fat died. Today, unfortunately, it's going the other way. We have a population extremely overweight, and mostly in my age group. And it doesn't have to be that way. Then we look at exercise. Again, Our ancestors were active. They had to survive. They didn't go to the local gym. They didn't come to people like me. They had to stay active to survive. They had to look for their food. They had to hunt it. They had to gather it. And anytime they weren't hunting and gathering and eating and partying, they were sleeping. Fortunately, we live in a time when we don't have to do that anymore. But we become extremely lazy, particularly my age group. Boomers, we're in bad shape. I don't know about you, but I want to enjoy the rest of my life. That's one of my motivations of moving around and staying active. I love my wife. I enjoy my time with her. I love my kids and my grandkids. I love the people I work with, I train. I enjoy this, spending time with them and giving them knowledge so they can enjoy their lives as well. And that knowledge is diet, exercise, accountability, positive attitude. Know the body. There's no pill that's going to fix this problem. You can see commercials for Ozempic and Wegovy, all over TV all day long. And on the station, you can hear commercials for all this stuff too. I just shake my head. This isn't solving the problem. Solving the problem is taking the right approach to making these changes. Exercise, diet, nutrition, accountability. Okay, so we're looking at this and we're talking about, these hazard risk factors for coronary heart disease. And the number one is diabetes. 10 times higher. Cholesterol is like 1. It's 10 times higher risk, 10 times fold, higher risk of developing coronary heart disease if you're diabetic than a non-diabetic. And only 1 time if you have high cholesterol or LDL. So you're wondering, this doesn't make any sense, Lance. Okay, if there's diabetics, okay, and you're saying that the low-carb diet helps secure it or get it under control so people need less medication or can get off of it, why does the American Diabetic Association push insulin instead? Because they're tied into the drug industry. This is from The Guardian. The American Diabetes Association takes millions from companies that stand to profit from our reliance on drugs. Is that affecting their guidance? For a glimpse of how big business influences a $4 trillion U.S. healthcare system, look no further than the world's most powerful advocacy and research nonprofit, the American Diabetes Association. Diabetes afflicts 38 million Americans, with another 98 million considered pre-diabetic. Every year, the disease claims the lives of over 100,000 Americans and disproportionately affects people of color. It is also ruinously expensive, as doctors' visits, hospital stays, insulin, blood test strips, leg amputations, continuous glucose monitors, and numerous glucose-lowering drugs add up to $400 billion a year. To put it bluntly, we're losing the war on diabetes. And unlike any other disease, such as certain cancers, Alzheimer's, kidney disease, or Crohn's, type 2 diabetes is reversible. This bears repeating and elaboration. Numerous nutritional studies have shown that diabetes can be reversed with a strict low-carbohydrate diet, the macronutrient that people with diabetes cannot metabolize without the help of drugs. The ADA concedes this, but you wouldn't necessarily know it from the drug therapies or the foods and recipes that the organization recommends to people suffering from this condition. In 2020, the then ADA president, Tracy Brown, rocked the diabetes world when she disclosed that she had type 2 diabetes and have gotten off insulin and other medications by adhering to a low-carbohydrate diet. Here's what I do. And it's pretty simple, she said, in an interview that might have made the ADA's pharmaceutical benefactors crazy. Elevated blood sugars happen when you have sugars in your body and you don't have insulin to manage the sugars in your body. Carbohydrates turn to sugar. So if you just try to get people to be aware of how many carbohydrates you are actually putting in your body, the next day, the low carbohydrate focused website group, Diet Doctors, published a breaking news story about the highly encouraging news that the influential CEO of the American Diabetes Association is on the record as a low carb eater. The following year, Brown resigned her position at the ADA to take a senior position at Walgreens. The evidence that low carb diets can effectively treat diabetes has been around at least since before insulin's discovery in 1921, when doctors often prescribed very low carbohydrates, fat-rich diets to their patients. In the late 18th century, as accounted by Gary Taubes' book, Rethinking Diabetes, What Science Reveals About Diet, Insulin and Successful Treatments, a Scottish doctor by the name of John Rollo helped patients with diabetes, a rare condition those days, return to health by restricting their dietary intake. It goes on and talks about more and more about it. I mean, the page is like 5 pages long. But the fact of the matter is, they're making buku bucks. When you look at a $4 trillion plus healthcare industry in this country, and we're spending $400 million on diabetes, and diabetes is the leading risk factor for coronary heart disease, it would make sense that the government and the pharmaceutical industry and the American Doctors Association, American Medical Association, would get their hands on and start to give us the knowledge that's necessary for reversing this epidemic in America. But we're not getting that information. Only shows like mine give it out. If you're a diabetic, I'd be grasping on and say, who wants to stick a needle in their side every day? Who wants to take all these high side effect medications to control their blood sugar when it's all about your diet and about exercise? Every day, continuously on television, they show commercials for Wegovy, Ozempic, and people are dancing around like they're happy. I'm not happy. You can't tell me somebody who has that condition is happy. They're not happy. That's why they're taking the medications to try to get it under control. They're not happy. Now, there is some natural things you can do to help this. Again, diet and exercise, accountability. But there's something called berberine. It's an herbal product. This is from Cleveland Clinic. When people like Cleveland Clinic say this, you know you got to have something there. The natural supplement, what you need to know about berberine, benefits, uses, and side effects, by Cleveland Clinic. The natural supplement may help you lose weight, lower blood sugar, and protect your heart. Spend any time online, you'll be bombarded with information about the latest trendy supplements. These all-natural remedies promise clearer skin, restful sleep, a flat belly, improved memory. The list is endless. The problem is that these claims often lack substantial data. It's hard to know which ones are truly beneficial. But berberine, a traditional Chinese medicine, may be a promising supplement. People are starting to look at more natural approaches and treatments, but not all natural things are without side effects or proven effective, says functional medicine specialist Elizabeth Bradley, MD, but berberine in many ways acts similarly to medication. Berberine is a bioactive compound, a chemical substance that can affect how humans and other living things function. It comes from plants and is part of a group of nitrogen-containing compounds called alkaloids. Caffeine is one of those too. While berberine might not be as well known as caffeine, it's not a new substance. It's been a staple in the Chinese medicine for nearly 400 years, mainly used to treat diarrhea and gastrointestinal infections. Research shows it may be effective in other chronic diseases, including diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and inflammatory diseases. When you take berberine as a pill or powder, it enters your bloodstream and travels through your cells, binding to different molecules. But instead of producing a single change, berberine interacts with multiple targets, impacting more than one disease at a time. Berberine works at a cellular level, works and changes how cells work by turning things on and off, says Dr. Bradley. Here are some of the benefits. The benefits of berberine show potential for anyone diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, metabolic syndrome, a collection of risk factors that make it more likely to be more serious health issues like diabetes, heart disease, and stroke. It can help high blood pressure, lipids. It can lower weight. It actually works as good as metformin, what they're saying. Eye problems, foot problems. This is from Cleveland Clinic. But you got to be real careful because not all berberine products are created the same. And so I want to say I'm working with a local nutraceutical laboratory to develop one for the populace. We'll introduce it here when it's ready. We're in test states right now. That will definitely help people get these things under control, along with lifestyle. Nothing does it without lifestyle control. Anyhow, we're talking about, the biggest risk factor for developing coronary heart disease is diabetes. 10-fold increased risk. Cholesterol is like 1.8. Yeah, 10-fold increased risk. You've 10-fold means it's 1,000 times higher risk of developing coronary heart disease if you are a diabetic, type 2. Right behind that is prediabetes or metabolic syndrome. Right behind them. Then there's hypertension. And we know that people are diabetics. Most of them have high blood pressure. Yeah. So they're all tied together. And the only way to change this is to change your diet and exercise. Unfortunately, most of them don't. And when we watch television and we have this false hope, just take this drug for your problem, it doesn't solve the problem. It just treats the symptom of the problem, which is high blood sugar. And it doesn't get it to normal. It brings it down. Because Cleveland Clinic many years ago told us or said they treat their patients who have blood sugar 90 and above as pre-diabetics. They fall in this category, 90 and above. And also when your blood sugar is 90, it increases your risk of coronary heart disease by nearly 300%. Yeah. But you're not being told that. So when you walk into the doctor's office, put them on the spot. Say, Doc, what about nutrition? And if they say, yeah, cut your fat down, cut your salt down, say, have you been paying attention? The rave now to how to treat this is all proving to be true is eating less carbs. See if the doc knows. If he doesn't, okay, enlighten him or her. All right, so here's a way you can enlighten yourself. Come see us. You'll get more information on how the body works metabolically than anywhere else. And bring your blood work. I'll read it for you. Okay, I'll tell you what I'm looking at because normal may not be good. Normal may be within their parameters for normal wouldn't be mine. Okay, you have normal and then you have healthy. There's a difference.